Jamal's shoes clicked against the sleek, polished floors of Hopewell Bank as he approached the large glass doors. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked in. The bank was bright, pristine, and carried an air of exclusivity that was impossible to ignore. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and the low hum of distant conversations floated across the spacious lobby. Today was supposed to be the day. After years of hard work building his tech startup from the ground up, this was the next step, the step that would take his business to the next level. Jamal had run the numbers a dozen times, and they all said the same thing. He was ready for expansion. All he needed now was capital, and if anyone should approve his loan, it was Hopewell Bank. He had every document in hand: a spotless credit report, glowing references from clients, and a business plan so solid it could have been used as a textbook example. The woman at the front desk smiled politely as she handed him a clipboard. "You're here for a loan consultation, correct?" "Yes," Jamal replied with a confident smile, though he could feel a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. This was more than just a meeting for him. It was the culmination of all his late nights and sacrifices, a chance to finally prove to everyone, especially himself, that his dreams were more than just dreams. "Mr. Peterson will see you in just a moment," the receptionist said. Her tone was professional, but there was something almost dismissive about the way she handed him the clipboard. Jamal tried to shake the feeling off, but a small seed of doubt began to form in the back of his mind. He took a seat near the large windows, watching as business people, all in sharp suits, passed by outside. He couldn't help but notice that most of them didn't look like him. His gaze flickered over to the framed photos on the walls, showcasing successful clients, all smiling next to their gleaming businesses. Once again, none of them looked like him. He tapped his foot impatiently as he filled out the forms, ignoring the growing tension. A few minutes later, a tall man with graying hair and an expensive-looking suit appeared. Mr. Peterson, the loan officer. He walked over with an air of authority, shaking Jamal's hand briefly before leading him into a small, well-furnished office. "Thank you for meeting with me today, Mr. Peterson," Jamal said as he sat down, spreading out his neatly organized documents. Of course. Let's get started, shall we?" Peterson replied, his eyes scanning over the paperwork with an expression that was hard to read. As the meeting progressed, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Peterson asked standard questions, but there was a coolness to his demeanor that didn't sit right. When Jamal finished laying out his business plan, emphasizing his impressive track record, Peterson leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen lightly against the table. "Well, Mr. Turner," Peterson began, "I appreciate your ambition. Your business plan is solid. However, at this time, I don't believe we'll be able to approve your loan request." Jamal blinked. "I don't understand. Everything is in order. My credit score is excellent, and my business has been steadily growing for the last 3 years." Peterson smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "It's not about the numbers, per se. We just feel that your venture may not be the best fit for our institution at this time." "Not the best fit?" Jamal repeated, the confusion in his voice quickly giving way to disbelief. "Can you explain what that means?" "It's just a matter of risk," Peterson replied vaguely, shuffling the papers back toward Jamal as if the conversation was already over. "You understand, I'm sure. The market is unpredictable, and we have to be cautious." Jamal's heart sank. He had heard stories like this before of black business owners being denied opportunities without a clear explanation. But he hadn't expected it to happen to him. Not with his credentials, not with his impeccable track record. "Mr. Peterson," Jamal said, his voice steady but firm, "I've shown you the numbers. My business is not a risk. If this isn't about the numbers, then what is it really about?" Peterson's expression hardened slightly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Turner, but this is our final decision. I suggest you try other avenues." Jamal sat there, stunned. He had prepared for so many possibilities, but not this. Not outright rejection for reasons that made no sense. He gathered his papers slowly, his hands trembling slightly. As he stood up, he looked Mr. Peterson squarely in the eyes. "You'll regret this," Jamal said quietly, his voice tinged with anger, but controlled. "I guarantee it." With that, he walked out of the office, his mind already racing with the next steps he would take. The world outside the bank felt colder than it had when he'd walked in, but Jamal knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let this be the end of his story. No matter how many doors slammed in his face, he would find a way to push them open. Jamal stormed out of Hopewell Bank, his breath coming in sharp bursts as he clutched his briefcase tightly. The sting of rejection still lingered in his chest, a combination of frustration, humiliation, and anger boiling inside him. How could they just dismiss him like that? Everything had been perfect: his numbers, his business, his future, and yet none of that seemed to matter to Mr. Peterson or Hopewell Bank. The cool breeze hit his face as he walked down the bustling city street, trying to calm the storm raging in his mind. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his thoughts. He pulled it out to see a message from his sister, Lisa. "How did the meeting go, bro? Let me know as soon as you're out." Jamal stared at the screen for a moment, contemplating how to respond. Lisa had always been his biggest supporter, encouraging him to chase his dreams when others doubted him. He typed back quickly, not wanting to worry her just yet. "It didn't go as planned. I'll tell you more later." He shoved his phone back into his pocket, the weight of the rejection pressing down on him. He had expected some challenges, sure, but not this, not to be denied outright with no clear reason. And it wasn't just about Hopewell Bank, it was the pattern. This was the third bank that had turned him down in the last few months. Each time, they'd given him vague explanations about risk and market concerns, but deep down, Jamal knew what it really was. He could feel it in the way they looked at him, the subtle shifts in their tone when they realized he wasn't like the typical applicant who walked into their offices. Jamal reached his small, modest office, a space he rented in a shared building with other small businesses. The door creaked open and the familiar smell of coffee and worn-out furniture greeted him. He dropped his briefcase on the desk and slumped into his chair, rubbing his temples. The pressure was building, and he didn't have much time left. His business had been growing steadily, but the lack of capital was holding him back from securing a crucial deal with a major tech company. If he couldn't get the loan, he'd have to pull out of the contract, and that would be the end of everything he had worked for. Jamal's stomach twisted at the thought. He couldn't let that happen. He stared at the vision board on the wall across from his desk, filled with goals, motivational quotes, and pictures of successful entrepreneurs. Among them was a photo of his late father, smiling proudly at Jamal's college graduation. His father had worked 2 jobs to ensure Jamal could go to school and follow his dreams. Jamal wasn't about to let all of that sacrifice be for nothing. Just then, his business partner and best friend, Dante, walked in, whistling as he balanced 2 cups of coffee. "Yo, what's up? I brought you a little pick-me-up," Dante said, handing Jamal a cup. "So, how'd it go with Hopewell? Did they finally give us the green light?" Jamal took a slow sip, staring into the dark liquid. "They said no." Dante's smile faded, replaced by a look of disbelief. "What? Why? You had everything set up? What's their excuse?" Jamal shook his head, his grip tightening around the cup. "Same as the others. They said it was too risky, that we weren't the right fit. But we both know what that really means, don't we?" Dante's face darkened and he set his cup down. "Man, this is the 3rd time. What's it going to take for them to stop seeing us as some kind of threat? We're legit. We've proven ourselves." "I know," Jamal said quietly, "but they don't care about that. It's not about the numbers. It's about who we are. I could feel it when Peterson looked at me. He didn't even bother to understand the plan. He just saw what he wanted to see." The room fell silent as the weight of Jamal's words sank in. It wasn't the first time they had dealt with this kind of subtle racism, but it didn't make it any easier. Dante ran a hand through his hair, pacing around the small office. "We can't keep running into this wall, man. We've worked too hard for this," Dante said, his frustration spilling out. Jamal nodded, feeling the same frustration gnawing at him. "I know, we've got less than a month to secure the funding before we lose the contract. If that happens, we're done." Dante stopped pacing and leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "So what's next? We go to another bank? Try some private investors? There's got to be someone out there willing to take a chance on us." Jamal let out a long sigh, rubbing his tired eyes. Maybe, but every rejection makes it harder to stay optimistic, you know? It's not just about this deal, it's about the fact that no matter how much we prove ourselves, we're still not enough in their eyes, and I'm sick of it. Dante gave him a long, hard look, his jaw clenched. We're going to figure this out, Jay, one way or another. I'm not letting them win. We'll find someone who sees us for who we really are, not just what they assume. Jamal appreciated Dante's determination, but the doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. How many more times could they get knocked down before it became too much? He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts, eyeing a few names that might lead to new opportunities. But deep down, he knew the problem was bigger than just finding the right investor. It was about breaking through the barriers that had been put in place long before he ever stepped into Hopewell Bank. Jamal leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of it all. He had come too far to give up now. He wasn't just fighting for his business. He was fighting for something bigger, for the chance to prove that black entrepreneurs deserved a seat at the table too. We'll figure it out, Jamal said, more to himself than to Dante. We have to. As the day wore on, Jamal and Dante began strategizing, determined to keep moving forward despite the obstacles. But even as they worked, the frustration and anger simmered just below the surface. Jamal knew this wasn't just a personal battle anymore. It was a fight against a system that had been stacked against him from the start. Jamal sat at his desk late into the night, the soft hum of his computer filling the otherwise silent office. The streetlights outside cast long shadows across the room, and the weight of his situation seemed to press down harder with each passing minute. His inbox was filled with rejection emails, all couched in the same vague language about market risks and fit. Each one felt like a punch in the gut, but he refused to let that stop him. He scrolled through articles, reports, and legal cases, searching for something, anything, that might give him an edge. Then he found it, a headline from a small news outlet. Systemic racism in lending, black entrepreneurs face higher barriers. The article detailed how banks across the country had been caught engaging in discriminatory lending practices, disproportionately rejecting loan applications from black and minority business owners, even when they were more qualified than their white counterparts. Jamal felt a spark of recognition as he read the personal stories of others like him, people who had been shut out of opportunities they had earned. "This is it," he whispered to himself, his eyes scanning the article for more details. "This isn't just happening to me. It's bigger than that." A deep anger brewed in his chest, but beneath it was a flicker of determination. Jamal realized that he wasn't just fighting for his business anymore. He was fighting against a system designed to keep him out. He closed the article and leaned back in his chair, the gears turning in his mind. He wasn't alone in this battle, and if others had fought back, so could he. The next morning, Jamal called Lisa, his sister, who worked as a lawyer specializing in civil rights cases. She had always been his go-to for advice, and if anyone could help him navigate this situation, it was her. "Lisa, I need your help," Jamal said as soon as she picked up the phone. "I think the banks are discriminating against me, and not just me. I've been reading about other black business owners facing the same thing. I want to do something about it." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Jamal could hear Lisa typing on her computer. "Discriminatory lending practices? It wouldn't surprise me, Jay. It's been a problem for years, but getting proof? That's the hard part." "I know, but I can't just sit here and do nothing. This is bigger than my loan, bigger than my business. I need to fight this," Jamal said, his voice growing more determined with each word. Lisa sighed. "All right, let's start by gathering everything you've got. I'll reach out to some civil rights organizations that have dealt with this before. If we can get enough evidence, we might be able to build a case. But I'm warning you, it's going to be a long fight." "I don't care how long it takes," Jamal replied. "I'm not giving up." After the call ended, Jamal felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let these banks crush his dreams, not without a fight. He started compiling everything: emails, loan applications, even the notes he had taken during his meetings with Mr. Peterson and other bank officers. Every detail mattered now. Weeks passed, and Jamal's frustration only deepened as more banks turned him down. But he wasn't sitting idly by anymore. He was working with Lisa and several civil rights groups to build a case, collecting testimonies from other black entrepreneurs who had faced similar treatment. They discovered patterns, consistent rejections, often from the same financial institutions, with vague or nonsensical reasons. Meanwhile, Jamal and Dante kept the business afloat through sheer grit and determination, taking on smaller contracts to keep the lights on. But the pressure was mounting. Without the major loan, they couldn't secure the big deal that would finally put them on the map. One evening, as they were going over the books, Dante looked up from the spreadsheet, his face a mask of concern. "Jay, we've got maybe 2 months left before we hit a wall. We need to find a way to get that loan, or I don't even want to think about what happens next." Jamal didn't respond immediately. He already knew the clock was ticking, and each rejection only made the deadline loom larger. But instead of despair, his mind turned toward a bolder, more daring plan, one that could not only save their business, but completely upend the system that had been working against them. "We're not just going to get a loan, D," Jamal said, leaning forward, his eyes sharp with a newfound determination. "We're going to buy the bank." Dante blinked, clearly taken aback. "Wait, what? Buy the bank? Hopewell?" Jamal nodded slowly, the idea solidifying in his mind. "Yeah, think about it. We've been rejected by these banks because they don't want us to succeed. But what if we were the ones in charge? What if we owned the institution that decides who gets loans? We'd change the whole game." Dante stared at Jamal for a moment, then broke into a grin, the audacity of the plan sparking something in him. "Man, that's crazy, but I like it." "It's not just about us anymore," Jamal continued. "This is about creating opportunities for every black business owner out there who's been told they're not good enough. We take over Hopewell Bank, and we make sure no one else has to go through what we did." Dante let out a low whistle, shaking his head in amazement. "It's a hell of a plan, but how do we even start?" "I've already got some connections," Jamal said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through his contacts. "There are black investment groups that are looking to make a difference in the financial world. I'm going to reach out to them, pitch the idea, and see if they'll back us. It's a long shot, but if we pull it off," Dante grinned, "we don't just change the game, we rewrite the rules." That night, Jamal made the calls. He connected with several investment groups, explaining the situation and laying out his vision for taking over Hopewell Bank. To his surprise, there was immediate interest. These groups had seen the same discrimination time and again, and they were looking for ways to disrupt the status quo. If Jamal could pull together enough support, this could be the start of something bigger than he had ever imagined. The process wasn't easy, though. There were legal hoops to jump through, financial analyses to conduct, and endless negotiations. But slowly the pieces began to fall into place. Jamal felt the momentum shifting. He was no longer the one asking for permission. He was the one making moves. And soon enough, the media caught wind of what he was trying to do. A young black entrepreneur, once denied a loan, now working to buy the very bank that had turned him away. It was a story made for headlines. As the press swarmed around the unfolding drama, the pressure on Hopewell Bank grew. Mr. Peterson and the other executives were scrambling, their polite smiles hiding the panic beneath. They had underestimated Jamal, and now they were starting to realize their mistake. But it was too late. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Jamal. The media attention surrounding his potential takeover of Hopewell Bank was growing, and with it came new challenges. Interviews, meetings, and negotiations consumed his days. Every move he made was being scrutinized by the public, the media, and most importantly, the banking world. Hopewell Bank, once an untouchable institution, was now caught in the center of a storm they hadn't seen coming. Jamal, with Dante at his side, kept pushing forward. They met with black investment groups, presented their case to potential investors, and even attracted the attention of a few civil rights organizations that saw their takeover as a monumental stand against institutional racism. Still, not everything was smooth sailing. The banking world was not ready to give up its power so easily, and neither were the executives at Hopewell. Mr. Peterson, in particular, seemed to be everywhere, trying to undermine Jamal's efforts behind the scenes. Rumors started to spread that Hopewell was preparing to quietly sell off some of its assets to block Jamal's buyout. Jamal and Dante sat in their office one evening, going over the latest financial reports they'd received. The office was cluttered with papers, laptops, and coffee cups, evidence of long nights and relentless work. The hum of the city outside barely reached their windows, but inside, the tension was palpable. "They're scared," Dante said, flipping through a stack of documents. "Hopewell knows what's coming, and they're trying to scramble. This is exactly what we wanted." Jamal nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. "Yeah, but they're not going to go down without a fight. Peterson's been leaking stories to the press, trying to paint us as inexperienced. They're saying we don't have the backing to pull this off." Dante laughed, shaking his head. "Let them talk. Once the deal goes through, they'll have to eat their words." Jamal leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "I hope you're right, man. But this isn't just about proving them wrong. This is about changing the game for people like us. I can't let this slip away." The weight of what they were trying to accomplish was not lost on Jamal. If they could pull off the buyout, it would send shockwaves through the banking industry. It would be a signal to every black entrepreneur, every minority-owned business, that the system could be beaten, that they could break through the barriers placed in their way. But the pressure was getting to him. Late at night, when the city quieted down, doubts crept into Jamal's mind. Was this too big? Was he biting off more than he could chew? The weight of the entire black business community seemed to rest on his shoulders, and the fear of failure gnawed at him. The next day, Jamal found himself in a meeting with Maya Roberts, the head of a prominent black investment group. Maya had built her reputation by backing minority-owned businesses, and she had a sharp eye for spotting potential. She had been one of the first to take an interest in Jamal's plan to buy out Hopewell, and this meeting could be the tipping point. Jamal sat across from her in the sleek, modern office of her investment firm, the tension in the room almost palpable. He had prepared for this moment for weeks, going over every number, every detail of the buyout plan until he knew it by heart. Maya flipped through the presentation Jamal had brought, her face unreadable. After a long pause, she looked up at him, her sharp eyes locking onto his. "You've got ambition, Jamal," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "I've seen a lot of people come through my doors with big ideas, but what you're trying to do is more than just business. It's a revolution." Jamal nodded. "That's exactly what it is. We're not just buying a bank. We're changing the way people like us are treated in this industry. We're breaking down a system that's kept us out for too long." Maya leaned back in her chair, considering his words. "I've looked at your numbers. The plan is solid. But there's more at stake here than just money. Once you make this move, the entire world will be watching. The pressure will be enormous. Are you ready for that?" Jamal didn't hesitate. "I've been dealing with pressure my whole life. This is no different. I know what's at stake, and I'm ready to take it on." Maya studied him for a moment longer before nodding slowly. "All right, I'm in. We'll back you." A wave of relief washed over Jamal, but he kept his composure. This was just one step in the journey, but it was a crucial one. With Maya's backing, the buyout was closer to becoming a reality. Later that week, Jamal was scheduled to meet with the board of directors at Hopewell Bank. The meeting had been arranged after weeks of back-and-forth negotiations, and tensions were running high. Hopewell knew what was coming, and they weren't happy about it. As Jamal stepped into the sleek boardroom, the air was thick with tension. The bank's executives sat around a long, polished table, their expressions cold and guarded. Mr. Peterson sat at the far end, his eyes narrowing as Jamal took his seat. The head of the board, Ms. Greenwood, an older woman with an air of authority, cleared her throat. "Mr. Turner, we understand you've made a significant offer for the majority shares of Hopewell Bank. But I have to ask, what makes you think you can run this institution better than we have?" Jamal didn't flinch. He had been preparing for this moment. "With all due respect, Ms. Greenwood, it's not about me thinking I can run it better. It's about changing the way this institution operates. For too long, Hopewell and banks like it have denied opportunities to people who deserve them simply because of the color of their skin." Peterson scoffed from the other end of the table, but Jamal ignored him, keeping his focus on Ms. Greenwood. I've been in your offices. I've sat across from your loan officers, only to be turned away without a real reason. And I'm not the only one. There are thousands of black business owners just like me who have been denied the chance to grow their businesses. That's why I'm here. Not just to run this bank, but to transform it. Ms. Greenwood raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by his boldness. You're talking about a complete overhaul of our lending practices. That's no small feat. Jamal nodded. Exactly, and it's long overdue. We have a chance to do something groundbreaking here, to make Hopewell a leader in fair and equitable banking. But if you don't want to be part of that change, then I'm more than willing to take this fight public. There was a moment of silence as the board members exchanged glances. They knew the tide was turning. The media was already covering the story, and public support for Jamal was growing. The bank was cornered. Ms. Greenwood finally spoke, her tone measured. We'll take your offer under serious consideration. But know this, Mr. Turner. Running a bank is more than just a statement. It's a responsibility. Jamal met her gaze, unflinching. I understand that, and I'm ready for it. As Jamal left the boardroom, he felt the weight of what he had just set in motion. The fight wasn't over yet, but he was closer than ever. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. Jamal was no longer the man begging for a loan. He was the man taking control of the future. The sun was barely rising over the city skyline when Jamal arrived at the offices of Hopewell Bank for what would be the most important day of his life. Today, everything would either fall into place or it would come crashing down. The board was set to make their final decision on his offer to buy out the majority shares of the bank. Months of relentless work, late nights, and countless obstacles had led to this moment. Jamal stepped out of his car, the weight of the situation heavy on his shoulders, but his determination unshaken. He had fought too hard to turn back now. As he walked toward the building, he was greeted by a sea of reporters, their cameras flashing as they called out his name. Jamal, do you think the board will approve your offer? What's your plan if they reject you? Is this the start of a revolution in the banking world? Jamal kept his face neutral, giving nothing away. He was no stranger to media attention at this point, but today was different. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. Inside, Dante was waiting for him in the lobby. His best friend looked tense, but there was a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. You ready for this, man? Dante asked, giving him a solid handshake. Jamal nodded, his jaw set with determination. More than ready. The two men made their way to the boardroom, where the fate of the bank and their future would soon be decided. The tension was thick as they entered the room. The board members were already seated, their expressions unreadable. Ms. Greenwood sat at the head of the table, her steely gaze fixed on Jamal as he took his seat. After what felt like an eternity, Ms. Greenwood cleared her throat. Mr. Turner, we've reviewed your offer in detail, and we've carefully considered the implications of such a takeover. Jamal sat up straight, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment he had been working toward for months. Ms. Greenwood glanced at the papers in front of her before looking Jamal squarely in the eye. The board has decided to accept your offer. The words hung in the air for a moment, almost unreal. Jamal blinked, processing what she had just said. Then, the weight of the victory hit him all at once. He had done it. He had won. Dante let out a quiet cheer beside him, clapping Jamal on the back, but Jamal remained composed, nodding respectfully toward Ms. Greenwood and the other board members. He couldn't let them see just how much this meant to him. Not yet. Thank you, Jamal said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. I appreciate the board's decision. I promise you, this bank is about to become something the entire community can be proud of. Miss Greenwood gave him a thin smile. We'll hold you to that, Mr. Turner. Hours later, Jamal stood outside the bank, watching as the media swarmed around him. The news had spread like wildfire. Jamal Turner, a black entrepreneur denied a loan, had just bought out Hopewell Bank. The headline was plastered across every news site and broadcast. The crowd of reporters and onlookers seemed to grow by the minute, their cameras and microphones all aimed at him. Jamal took a deep breath as he prepared to address them. This wasn't just his victory. This was a moment for every black entrepreneur who had ever been told they weren't good enough, for every business owner who had been shut out of opportunities because of systemic racism. This was their victory too. He stepped up to the podium, the crowd quieting as he began to speak. Today isn't just about buying a bank, Jamal began, his voice clear and strong. It's about creating a new future, one where opportunities aren't based on the color of your skin, but on the strength of your ideas, your work ethic, and your determination. Hopewell Bank will no longer be a place that shuts doors on black and minority-owned businesses. From this day forward, it will be a place that lifts them up. The crowd erupted into applause, the energy in the air electric. Jamal continued, his confidence growing with each word. For too long, we've been told that we don't belong in spaces like this, that we're not the right fit. But today we change that. Today we take control of our own future. As the applause swelled, Jamal felt a deep sense of pride wash over him. He had done it. He had turned the very system that had tried to keep him out into something that would serve his community for generations to come. But this was just the beginning. Later that evening, Jamal sat in his office at the newly acquired Hopewell Bank. The room was quiet, the noise from the day's events finally fading away. He stared at the nameplate on the desk, Jamal Turner, CEO. It still felt surreal. Dante walked in, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. "Here's to making history, my man," he said, handing Jamal a glass. Jamal chuckled, clinking his glass against Dante's. "We really did it, didn't we?" "Damn right we did," Dante said with a grin. "And this is just the start." Jamal took a sip of his drink, leaning back in his chair. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to relax, if only for a moment. But as he sat there, the weight of what lay ahead began to settle in. Running a bank wasn't going to be easy, especially not when they were trying to overhaul everything from the ground up. But Jamal was ready. He had spent his entire life fighting against the odds, and this was just the next battle. Only now, he had the power to make real, lasting change. "We're going to build something incredible here, D," Jamal said, his voice soft but filled with determination. "We're going to give people like us the opportunities we never had." Dante nodded, his expression serious. "We're going to change the game." Jamal stared out the window at the city below, the lights twinkling in the distance. This was more than just a victory, it was a movement, and he was just getting started. The following months were a whirlwind of activity as Jamal and his team worked tirelessly to restructure Hopewell Bank from the inside out. The first order of business was transforming the bank's lending practices. Jamal had made it clear from day one, Hopewell would no longer be an institution that turned its back on minority business owners. Instead, it would become a beacon of opportunity for those who had been marginalized for far too long. One of Jamal's most significant changes was the creation of a small business loan program specifically aimed at minority entrepreneurs. He reached out to black business owners, community leaders, and local entrepreneurs, ensuring that they had access to resources, mentorship, and most importantly, the capital they needed to succeed. Word spread quickly, and within weeks, applications poured in from across the city. Jamal personally reviewed many of the applications, taking pride in seeing the diverse array of businesses and ideas being pitched. These were the very people who had once been denied the same opportunities he had fought so hard to obtain, and now he had the power to help them. One day, while reviewing loan applications, Jamal's assistant knocked on the door and poked her head in. "Jamal, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice filled with a bit of hesitation. "It's Mr. Peterson." Jamal's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He hadn't seen or heard from Mr. Peterson since the takeover, and he certainly wasn't expecting a visit from the former loan officer who had been the face of his rejection all those months ago. "Send him in," Jamal said, leaning back in his chair, curious about what the man could possibly want. Mr. Peterson walked into the office, looking far less self-assured than he had the day Jamal had sat across from him to apply for that fateful loan. His posture was slightly slouched, and there was a look of uncertainty in his eyes. "Mr. Turner," Peterson began, clearing his throat awkwardly, "I wanted to congratulate you on everything you've accomplished. I've been watching from the sidelines, and Well, it's impressive what you've done with the bank. Jamal stared at him for a moment, unsure how to respond. He had no interest in Peterson's approval, but something in the man's tone caught his attention. There was no sarcasm or condescension, just sincerity. Jamal gestured for Peterson to sit. Peterson took a seat across from Jamal's desk, looking around the office as if seeing it through new eyes. I guess I wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I treated you back then. I didn't see it at the time, but now, looking at what you've built here, I realize how wrong I was. Jamal nodded, his expression thoughtful. He had already moved past the anger and frustration of that rejection, focusing instead on his mission to transform the bank. But hearing Peterson's apology brought a strange sense of closure. I appreciate that, Jamal said finally. But it wasn't just about you, Peterson. It was about the system, the way it's been set up to keep people like me out. All I've done is tear down the walls that were standing in the way. Peterson nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. I see that now. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to acknowledge the impact you've had. I underestimated you. Jamal smiled faintly. You're not the only one. There was a long silence between the two men, a quiet understanding passing between them. Then, Peterson stood, extending his hand. Jamal hesitated for a moment before standing and shaking it. As Peterson left, Jamal turned back to his desk, reflecting on how far he had come. He wasn't the same man who had walked into Hopewell Bank months ago, hopeful and desperate for a loan. He was now the one in control, reshaping the very institution that had tried to shut him out. The grand reopening of Hopewell Bank, now rebranded as the People's Bank, was a day of celebration. The streets outside the building were filled with people. Black entrepreneurs, community leaders, families, and local business owners gathered to witness the beginning of a new chapter. A stage had been set up in front of the bank, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement and pride. Jamal stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of the community that had supported him from the very beginning. Among them were his sister, Lisa, and Dante, both beaming with pride. Lisa had been instrumental in helping him navigate the legal battles, and Dante had been his partner through every setback and victory. They had made this journey together. Jamal cleared his throat and began his speech, his voice strong and filled with emotion. Today is not just the reopening of a bank, he said, pausing as the crowd quieted. Today marks the beginning of a movement toward equality, toward fairness, and toward opportunity for everyone. The People's Bank will stand as a symbol of what's possible when we come together and break down the barriers that have held us back. The crowd erupted into applause, and Jamal felt a surge of pride. He wasn't just a business owner anymore. He was part of something much larger, a force for change. As the event wound down, Jamal stepped off the stage and made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and sharing smiles with those who had come to support him. People congratulated him, thanking him for what he was doing for the community. Then, as the crowd began to thin, Jamal spotted a young man standing off to the side, clutching a small folder of documents. He looked nervous, but determined, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Jamal walked over to him, recognizing the familiar look of someone who had a dream but was unsure if the world would allow it to come true. "Hey there," Jamal said, offering a friendly smile. "What's your name?" The young man swallowed nervously before answering. It's Malik. I'm trying to start a business, and I heard about what you're doing with the People's Bank. I came to see if maybe you could help me." Jamal's smile widened, and he gestured toward the entrance of the bank. "Well, Malik, you're in the right place. Why don't we step inside and you can tell me all about your business?" As they walked toward the doors, Jamal couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why he had fought so hard, not just for himself, but for people like Malik, who needed a chance to build something of their own. The People's Bank became a beacon of hope for minority entrepreneurs, offering loans, guidance, and resources to those who had once been overlooked. The impact was immediate. New businesses sprouted up across the city, creating jobs and revitalizing neighborhoods that had long been neglected. Jamal's journey from rejection to ownership had inspired countless others, both in his city and beyond. His story was featured in magazines, newspapers, and television programs, but for Jamal, the real victory was seeing his community thrive. As he stood in his office one evening, watching the city lights twinkle below, Jamal felt a quiet sense of pride. He had started this journey with nothing but a dream, and now he was living proof that no matter the odds, no matter the barriers, change was possible. He had not only changed his own life, he had changed the lives of countless others. And this was just the beginning.